November 6th, 1956. 4:47 in the morning, Washington, D.C. A phone rings in the Oval Office, cutting through the pre-dawn silence. President Eisenhower reaches for the receiver. On the other end, the British Prime Minister's voice carries a weight that transcends the usual formalities of diplomatic calls. This isn't a courtesy chat between allies. Britain's currency is in free fall, collapsing in real time as the world watches. The pound sterling has hemorrhaged 15% of its value in just 72 hours. Britain's foreign reserves are nearly exhausted. They have perhaps 48 hours left before the entire system fails. After that, the lights go out across what remains of the empire. And here's the detail that should fundamentally change how you understand modern power. This crisis wasn't accidental. It was engineered deliberately and methodically by the United States. This was the deployment of a financial weapon so devastating that most people have never even heard of it. A weapon that's been used three distinct times in history, once in 1956, once in 1973, and it's being prepared for use again right now. You probably think wars are fought with tanks, missiles, and soldiers on battlefields. But the deadliest weapon deployed in modern history isn't constructed from metal or explosives. It's built from debt, leverage, and the willingness to make one phone call at the right moment. In November 1956, America aimed that weapon directly at its closest ally and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Why would America do this to Britain? Because Britain and France had invaded Egypt without asking permission, without consultation, without even a courtesy heads up. They invaded to control a canal, to reassert colonial power in a world that was moving beyond colonialism. America decided to punish them not with military force, but by systematically destroying their currency. Within 96 hours, Britain went from being a global superpower with nuclear weapons to a financial beggar desperately pleading for help. The method was so effective, so utterly devastating, that it's been classified as economic warfare ever since. But here's what the history books conveniently leave out. The same mechanism exists today, only it's bigger, faster, and exponentially more lethal. And it's already been deployed at least twice in just the last 5 years. The weapon wasn't retired after Suez. It evolved. Let me take you back to October 29th, 1956. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser walks confidently to a podium in Alexandria. 20,000 Egyptians have packed into the square, sensing that something historic is about to happen. Nasser announces that he's nationalizing the Suez Canal, taking control of the waterway that Britain and France built, that they considered their property. This is the canal that carries roughly 70% of Europe's oil supply, the canal that generates around $100 million a year in revenue, a staggering sum in 1956 dollars. Nasser has just seized it. No negotiation, no compensation, no diplomatic niceties. He simply took it. The British Prime Minister, Anthony Eden, reads the telegram at 9:15 p.m. London time. He doesn't sleep that night. Neither does the French president, because both men immediately understand the implications. Without the Suez Canal, Europe doesn't just suffer economically, it starves. This isn't hyperbole. About 1.5 million barrels of oil flow through that canal every single day. Nasser has effectively turned off Europe's blood supply with one speech. For 3 months, Britain and France plan an invasion in absolute secrecy, recruiting Israel as a partner in what amounts to an elaborate piece of military theater. The plan is both elegant and vicious in its conception. Israel invades Egypt through the Sinai Peninsula. Britain and France then step in, playing the role of concerned peacekeepers, demanding that both sides withdraw from the canal zone. When Egypt predictably refuses, Britain and France invade under the pretense of protecting international shipping. They calculate they'll control the waterway within a week. Nasser will be humiliated or dead. The oil keeps flowing to Europe, and the old colonial order reasserts itself. It's essentially colonialism wearing a humanitarian costume. And militarily, it works perfectly. On October 29th, Israeli forces cross into Sinai. 30 hours later, British and French paratroopers are dropping into Port Said. By November 5th, they control the northern entrance to the canal. The military operation is, from a tactical standpoint, a masterpiece of planning and execution. But they made one catastrophic mistake. They forgot to tell America. They forgot that in 1956, Britain and France were no longer the dominant powers they had been before World War II. President Eisenhower finds out about the invasion from news reports, not from his supposed allies. He's watching CBS Evening News when he learns that America's closest partners have just launched a war. He's furious, and not because he has any particular love for Egypt or Nasser. He's furious because Britain and France just hijacked American foreign policy during an election week. Eisenhower is running for re-election in 72 hours. His entire campaign is built on being the peace president, the man who ended the Korean War, the man who kept America out of Vietnam. And now his closest allies have started what looks like a colonial war without even consulting him. The situation gets worse rapidly. The Soviets are threatening to intervene militarily. Soviet Premier Bulganin sends a letter on November 5th that doesn't bother with diplomatic subtlety. We are fully determined to crush the aggressors by the use of force, it reads. This is an empty posturing. The Soviets have about 20 nuclear missiles. Britain has 6. France has 0. If the Soviets actually join Egypt in this conflict, this regional invasion becomes World War III. Eisenhower has roughly 72 hours to stop it before the situation spirals completely out of control. Here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, where you see a completely different kind of power being exercised. Eisenhower doesn't send troops. He doesn't threaten military action. He doesn't even raise his voice or make public threats. He makes 3 phone calls. That's all. 3 phone calls, and the British Empire collapses. Call 1 to the Federal Reserve. Call 2 to the International Monetary Fund. Call 3 to the Treasury Secretary. And Britain's entire economy begins disintegrating. Let me show you exactly how this mechanism works, because understanding it is crucial to understanding how power actually operates in the modern world. Britain's economy in 1956 runs on one fundamental thing: confidence in the pound sterling. The pound is the world's second reserve currency after the dollar. Approximately 40% of global trade is settled in British pounds. Countries hold pounds as reserves. Businesses use pounds for international transactions. The pound is essentially as good as gold. But there's a structural problem, a fundamental weakness that Britain has been hiding. Britain doesn't actually have enough gold to back up all those pounds in circulation. They're running what amounts to a Ponzi scheme on a national scale. Every pound in circulation is theoretically backed by a promise. If you want to exchange your pounds for gold, the British government will give you gold. But Britain only has about $2 billion in gold reserves. And there are 10 billion pounds in circulation around the world. The math doesn't work. Britain's entire currency system functions only as long as nobody actually asks for their gold back. The system runs on confidence, on trust, on the belief that the pound is backed by something solid. It's a house of cards built on collective belief. Eisenhower asks for the gold back. He calls the bluff. November 6th, morning. The Federal Reserve begins selling British pounds into the market. Massive volume, relentless selling, hour after hour. Every pound sold is a pound that floods back to Britain demanding gold in exchange. Within just 6 hours, 250 million pounds hit the market. The pound drops 3% against the dollar, then 5%. By evening, it's down 9%. Britain's treasury is hemorrhaging gold reserves, watching them evaporate in real time. They're down to 1.8 billion, then 1.5 billion. At this rate, they have days left, maybe hours, before they completely run out. When they run out of gold, the pound becomes worthless paper. Every British import stops immediately. Food, oil, medicine, everything. And Britain in 1956 imports 60% of its food. Without foreign currency to pay for imports, 30 million people start starving within 2 weeks. This isn't theory. This is the mathematical reality of the situation. Here's the beautiful, terrible brutality of this weapon. America doesn't have to invade Britain, doesn't have to bomb London or threaten British citizens, doesn't even have to make a public threat or announcement. They just sell pounds on the open market. That's it. Selling currency is legal. It's normal. It happens every day. But when the Federal Reserve starts selling, everyone else panics and starts selling too. Currency traders see the Fed dumping pounds and they think they know something we don't. Within 24 hours, the entire global market is selling pounds. Britain can't stop it. They can't fight it. They can't even slow it down significantly. Because the weapon isn't bullets or bombs. It's mathematics. It's the inexorable logic of supply and demand, of confidence and panic. Anthony Eden calls Eisenhower on November 6th. The conversation lasts exactly 9 minutes. There's no official transcript, but the British cabinet minutes record what happens immediately after. Eden agrees to an immediate ceasefire, full withdrawal from Egypt within 2 weeks. No conditions, no face saving compromises, no diplomatic maneuvering. Total, unconditional surrender. In exchange, Eisenhower makes one phone call to the Federal Reserve. The selling stops. The pound stabilizes at 2.78 to the dollar, down 15% from pre crisis levels, but no longer in free fall. Britain survives. Barely. But the British Empire is effectively over, not because of military defeat, but because of financial vulnerability. Britain will never launch a major military operation without explicit American approval again, not because they lack soldiers or weapons, because they lack currency sovereignty. They lack the ability to act independently when their entire economy can be destroyed in 96 hours by American financial power. But here's what they don't tell you in the history books, what gets conveniently omitted from most discussions of the Suez Crisis. This weapon wasn't new. America had tested it before, in 1949, against Britain, using the same basic mechanism but on a smaller scale. And they've used it multiple times since Suez. Once in 1973, against Britain again, and once in 1992, against Britain a third time. Do you see the pattern emerging? Britain kept trying to act independently to maintain some semblance of sovereign foreign policy. America kept destroying the pound in response. 3 times in 45 years. Same playbook, same mechanism, same result every single time. By 1992, Britain learns the lesson permanently. They abandon any pretense of independent foreign policy. They become America's junior partner in everything that follows. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya. Britain doesn't lead anymore. Britain follows. Not because of military defeat, but because of currency terror, because of the memory of watching their economy collapse in real time. Now let me show you why this matters to you. Right now, today, in 2026. The currency weapon didn't get retired after the Cold War ended. It didn't become obsolete with globalization. It got exponentially more powerful. In 1956, the Federal Reserve could dump 250 million pounds and crash Britain's economy. That's roughly $3 billion in today's money. Significant, certainly, but potentially manageable for a modern economy with the tools and institutions we have now. Except the numbers aren't comparable anymore. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet in 1956, $25 billion. Today, $7.8 trillion. That's a 312-fold increase. The currency weapon didn't evolve. It went nuclear. Here's how the mechanism works today in our interconnected financial system. America runs the global reserve currency. About 60% of all foreign exchange reserves are held in dollars. Roughly 88% of all currency trades involve dollars on at least one side of the transaction. Every country on earth needs dollars to buy oil, to pay international debts, to conduct trade, which means every country is vulnerable to the exact same attack Britain faced in 1956. If America wants to punish you economically, they don't need to invade. They don't even need to impose formal sanctions through international institutions. They just stop providing dollars. Or worse, they flood the market with your currency and watch it collapse. Let me give you 3 concrete examples from just the last decade. 3 instances where this weapon appears to have been deployed. Russia, 2014. Russia annexes Crimea in March, directly challenging American interests and international norms. By December, the ruble has lost 50% of its value. Putin and Russian officials claim it's an organic market response to falling oil prices. But if you look at the volume data, at the actual patterns of trading, you see something interesting. Massive dollar-ruble transactions with no clear buyer or seller. Anonymous. High frequency. Perfectly timed to maximize panic in the market. The ruble drops 20% in a single day, December 16th. Russians call it Black Tuesday. Russia burns through $90 billion in reserves trying to stop the collapse. They fail completely. The ruble collapses from 33 to 68 per dollar over just 9 months. Russian imports become unaffordable overnight. Inflation hits 16%. Real wages drop 9%. Putin survives politically, But Russia's middle class is effectively destroyed, not by missiles or sanctions, but by currency collapse. Turkey, 2018. Turkey refuses to release an American pastor who's been detained. It's a diplomatic dispute, relatively minor in the grand scheme of international relations. Routine, even. Except President Trump tweets about imposing tariffs on August 10th. The Turkish lira drops 20% in one day, then another 15% over the next week. Here's why this matters. Turkey's foreign debt is denominated in dollars. When the lira collapses, Turkey's debt burden essentially doubles overnight. Companies go bankrupt by the hundreds because they can't service dollar denominated debts. The Turkish central bank burns through $50 billion in reserves trying to stabilize the currency. They can't stop it. The lira goes from 3.8 per dollar to 6.9 in just 3 months. Turkey capitulates. They release the pastor. The lira stabilizes. Total time from crisis to resolution 74 days. Weapon deployed, mission accomplished, weapon holstered. China, 2025. This one's happening right now as we speak. The yuan has lost 11% against the dollar since January. China's foreign reserves have dropped by $340 billion in just 6 months. The official explanation from Chinese authorities: capital outflows due to economic slowdown. But if you look at the volume patterns, they look eerily familiar. Anonymous selling, high frequency trades, perfect timing to maximize impact. China has 3.2 trillion in reserves, which sounds like an enormous amount, like they're invulnerable. But if the selling continues at the current pace, they have about 18 months before they hit critical levels. After that, China faces the same choice Britain faced in 1956: surrender sovereignty and comply with American demands, or watch your currency die and your economy collapse. Here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in power wants to say out loud, that gets whispered in central bank meetings but never stated publicly. The Suez Crisis proved definitively that military power without currency sovereignty is essentially theater. Britain had nuclear weapons in 1956. Didn't matter. France had arguably the finest military in Europe. Didn't matter. Israel won the ground war in 72 hours. Didn't matter at all, because America controlled the money. And whoever controls the money ultimately controls everything else. Tanks can't fight if you can't buy fuel. Soldiers can't eat if you can't import food. Missiles don't launch if you can't pay contractors. Currency is the master weapon. Everything else, all the traditional measures of military power, are downstream from currency sovereignty. But here's what makes this weapon so uniquely terrifying compared to conventional military force. The weapon is completely invisible until it's actually used. Eisenhower didn't announce he was attacking Britain's currency. No press conference, no public declaration, no warning. Britain only realized what was happening when their gold reserves started evaporating. By then, it was far too late to mount any effective defense. The weapon is deployed in silence, executed in darkness, and only becomes visible in hindsight when economists and historians piece together what happened. You don't see it coming. You can't prepare a defense because you don't know you're under attack. You just wake up one morning and your currency is worth half what it was yesterday. Your savings, your salary, your entire economic future cut in half by invisible forces you can't fight or even clearly identify. And here's the final irony that should genuinely keep you awake at night. The currency weapon only works because everyone believes in the system. The dollar is valuable because we collectively agree it's valuable. US Treasury bonds are considered safe because we agree they're safe. The entire structure runs on faith, on collective belief. The moment that agreement breaks, the moment people stop believing, the weapon breaks too. Which is why every single time America uses the currency weapon, they're making a bet. They're betting that nobody will start questioning the underlying system. They're betting you won't ask the dangerous question: if America can destroy Britain's currency in 96 hours, who's to say someone couldn't eventually do the same to the dollar? The weapon is built entirely on faith. And faith, as history repeatedly shows us, is fragile. What happened after Suez? Britain withdrew completely by December 22nd, 1956. Anthony Eden resigned in January 1957, his health destroyed, his political legacy in ruins. Egypt kept the canal. Nasser became a hero across the Arab world. a symbol of successful resistance to colonial power. The Soviet Union learned a crucial lesson that America would protect its interests with financial force rather than military force. They started seriously building their own currency alternatives, though it would take decades. The French, absolutely furious at what they saw as American betrayal, began developing a more independent foreign policy. Charles de Gaulle would pull France out of NATO's command structure 10 years later, explicitly citing Suez as one of the reasons. And Britain never recovered its former position. The pound would be devalued again in 1967, again in 1973, again in 1992. Each time, America held the knife, America controlled the outcome. The Suez Crisis wasn't the end of the British Empire because of military defeat. It was the end because Britain discovered they were living on borrowed money and borrowed time. The empire was debt held together by currency confidence. The moment that confidence broke, the empire evaporated. Not gradually over decades, but rapidly over days. And every nation on earth learned the same fundamental lesson. You can have the biggest military, the finest intelligence service, the most advanced technology. But if you don't control your own currency, if you're dependent on the dollar system, you ultimately control nothing. Today, 67 years after Suez, the weapon is loaded and aimed at multiple targets simultaneously. China's yuan, Russia's ruble, Turkey's lira, Iran's rial, Venezuela's bolivar. Any country that challenges American interests faces the same implicit threat Britain faced in 1956. Comply with American demands, or watch your currency collapse. And most countries comply, because they remember what happened to the ones who didn't. Because the history is there for anyone who cares to look. But here's the question nobody wants to ask, the question that haunts every central banker, every finance minister, every world leader who understands what happened in 1956. What happens when the weapon stops working? What happens when countries stop believing in the dollar's invincibility? What happens when someone successfully builds a currency system that America can't attack? Because that's exactly what China, Russia, and roughly half of the developing world are trying to build right now. Alternative payment systems, digital currencies, gold-backed trade mechanisms. They're not doing this because they love gold or hate America ideologically. They're doing it because they remember 1956. They remember the phone calls. They remember watching the pound collapse in real time while Britain begged for mercy. And they're building the defenses that America's use of this weapon forced them to build. The crisis that nearly started World War III wasn't triggered by a coin at all. It was triggered by the pound sterling, by currency, by money. And the war it nearly started wasn't going to be fought with armies on battlefields. It was being fought with ledgers, exchange rates, and 3 phone calls. Britain lost in 96 hours. The empire ended not with a bang, but with a balance sheet, with numbers on a page showing that the gold was gone. And the weapon that killed it is still here, still loaded, still aimed, still waiting for the next country that steps out of line. The next country that forgets that in the modern world, currency is sovereignty, and sovereignty requires currency. That's the real lesson of Suez. That's what they don't teach you. And that's why it matters today.